What are some of the benefits of applying mulching onto your garden, especially in the backyard? So in this video you can see some kales being grown in the backyard, and there's mulch applied all over on the garden of kales here. So we are going to zoom closer to see the mulch more clearly. So that's the mulch, right? That's the mulch, which is made of dried grasses. A few weeds could be growing there, but of course you can pick them off by hand and dump them still on the garden because they will rot and decompose at the end of the day. So this mulch is very important for the garden and for the vegetables which are growing there. Here are some of the reasons as to why it's important. One, it helps to preserve the moisture content in the soil by preventing evaporation of that water from the soil, and therefore that moisture content being retained in the soil helps the plants to thrive better within the soil because they will have a relatively longer period of availability of water for their optimal growth. That's one and an important reason as to why we should apply mulch in our gardens. Another reason, very important also, is because of the fact that this mulch, it is not removed from the garden at any given point in time, meaning that after one growing season, this mulch will be dug up and mixed up into the soil so that it forms a good organic manure within that soil. So that means that the plants which will be planted here in this same garden in subsequent planting cycles will have plenty of supply of organic manure from the mulch that will have mixed up in the soil once this current plant's growing cycle actually comes to an end. That's another very important reason as to why we mulch our gardens with cut plants or cut grasses. So this mulch doesn't have to be expensive mulch because of the fact that you just use ordinary cut grasses which you must have slashed from your compound. So instead of either drying them and then burning them off, instead of dumping them in the rubbish pit and then burning them from there, usually it's recommendable that you actually bring them over to your garden and apply them as mulch within the area in which you've planted your vegetables. And it doesn't have to be vegetables specifically, it can be any other crop, as long as you apply it uniformly over the area in which your crops are growing, then they will help bring those two very important benefits which I've outlined earlier on. So this mulch, even if you bring it when it's still green and fresh, no problem, due to the fact that there will be sunshine most of the days of the year. The mulch will dry by itself slowly, and thereafter it starts decomposing, and after which you will then mix it up in the soil to ensure that your plants receive enough organic manure. So it doesn't have to be dried the way it is shown here. This has been here for quite some time, but I brought it when it was still freshly cut from the compound, and this will just dry on its own within the garden. Or if you prefer to dry it from the where you've cut it from and then bring it to the garden, still fine and good. At the end of the day, don't dump your cut grasses or burn them after you've cut them from your compound. It's usually better that you bring them over into your garden to form the mulch. So if your garden is small enough, then the mulch can be a bit thick. I'll show you what I mean here. You can see the layer of thickness of the mulch. If your garden is small enough, then the layer of thickness will be a bit bigger. But if your garden is a little bit bigger, then it means that the mulch will be spread over a wider area, and therefore the thickness could be a little bit thin. But still, at the end of the day, you'll have brought that benefit of organic manure and moisture retention for the soil, and therefore optimal health for your plants. So this means that you'll also be avoiding uh, costs associated with buying fertilizers, the chemical fertilizers from the agro shops. You'll also be minimizing on the usage of water in your garden, especially if it's a small scale garden in your backyard for consumption, sorry, for supply of vegetables to for your own consumption. You'll be minimizing the need for watering your garden because of the fact that we've said that the mulch helps to retain the water within the soil, and therefore makes that water available, that moisture available for the optimal growth of the plants. So I hope you can see which vegetables these are. These are collards or kales, and they are very frequently consumed across the world. In some places like East Africa, they are a favorite uh, crop for making sauce, and in some other places you find that people have grown them on very large scale and they supply them to the market, and they have become quite rich from just this crop alone, kales or collards. So apart from retaining the water and affording organic manure to your crops, there's another third and quite important reason also as to why we should apply mulch onto our gardens. You see, in this area where mulch has been applied, are there weeds growing? Yes, you may spot a few weeds there, but majority of the weeds have been suppressed by the mulch, and that's because the mulch forms a covering that prevents growth of the other crops underneath them. So remember, each plant needs light to carry out the process of photosynthesis and therefore thrive in its growth. So weeds, being plants also, they will need the light, the sunshine, to carry out the photosynthesis. But now that photosynthesis has effectively been prevented by the mulch, and therefore those weeds generally tend to die off, or they fail to thrive in an area where mulching has been applied, and therefore no weeds in plenty within the garden where you have applied the mulch. And of course that will save you on labor costs associated with weeding, or save you time associated with weeding. In case it's a small garden like this in your backyard, you don't have to spend any time weeding. It's just a few weeds which will be propping up occasionally in the areas where the mulch is not very thick. For example, these ones you can just uproot them by hand and dump them in the garden. They'll still rot off and decompose and become manure also as the time goes by, because any plant which is not thriving, of course it will decompose and become manure in the soil unless it's removed from there. So those are some of the benefits associated with applying mulch in your garden. If you are planning to cut or mow your grasses in your compound, then consider that as an alternative source of manure in your garden.